Have you ever wondered what secrets your house might be hiding? The walls you see every day could have witnessed things you can't even imagine, tragedies, hauntings, or something far darker. Tonight, I'm sharing 5 terrifying true stories of families who moved into what they thought would be their perfect homes, only to discover that their dream house was actually a nightmare. These aren't just ghost tales whispered around a campfire. They are chilling accounts of real people who experienced things so disturbing that they were never the same again. From strange noises in the dead of night, to shadows that moved on their own, to entire houses that seemed alive with something evil. These are the kinds of stories that will make you look twice at your own bedroom door tonight. So lock your doors, dim the lights, and get ready. Because once you hear these stories, you'll never think of home the same way again. And our first story begins with a young couple who thought they had finally found their forever home. But what they didn't know was that the house was keeping a horrifying secret of its own. When Sarah and David first stepped into the little 2-story house at the edge of town, it felt like a dream come true. The paint was fresh, the hardwood floors gleamed, and the wide windows let in just the right amount of sunlight. After years of saving, sacrificing vacations, and working long hours, this was finally their forever home. A place to start a family, to celebrate holidays, and to grow old together. But sometimes, dreams turn into nightmares in ways no one can predict. The first few days were normal, unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and arguing playfully about where to put the couch. It wasn't until the first week that Sarah noticed something odd. Each night, when she climbed into bed, she would hear faint scratching sounds inside the walls. David dismissed it as mice, the kind of nuisance every old house had, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it sounded too deliberate, almost like nails dragging across the wood, slow and purposeful. One evening, while David was working late, Sarah decided to investigate. She followed the sound through the hallway, her phone flashlight guiding the way. The scratching grew louder the closer she got to the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. When she opened the door, the noise stopped instantly. Silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, pressing against your ears, almost suffocating. She stood there for a moment, scanning the empty room. Just a mattress on the floor and unpacked boxes. Nothing out of place. And yet, Sarah swore she could feel something watching her from the corner. A chill crept up her spine and she quickly closed the door, locking it behind her. That night she dreamed of a woman standing in that same room. Her hair hung in tangled strands across her face and her fingers scratched endlessly at the walls. Sarah woke up gasping, her heart pounding. The image burned into her mind. The following morning she told David about the dream. He laughed it off, joking that she'd been watching too many horror movies. But then he paused, almost guiltily, and admitted something. The realtor had mentioned very casually that the previous owner, a woman who lived alone, had passed away in that very room. Natural causes, nothing unusual at least, that's what they were told. From that point on, things escalated. The scratching returned every night, always louder in the guest room. The temperature in that room stayed icy cold no matter how high the thermostat was set. Sometimes, Sarah would catch a faint reflection in the window, a figure standing behind her when no one was there. And David, who once laughed at her fears, began to change too. He grew restless, irritable, snapping at Sarah for no reason. At night, he'd toss and turn, whispering things in his sleep. "Get out, she's here, she won't leave." One night, Sarah woke to find David standing in the hallway, staring at the guest room door. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't awake. He was sleepwalking. She gently shook him, and when he finally blinked awake, he looked terrified. "She's inside," he whispered hoarsely. "She doesn't want us here." That was the breaking point. The couple contacted a local historian who had records of the neighborhood, hoping to learn more about the house. What they discovered made their blood run cold. The woman who died there hadn't simply passed away quietly. She had lived a reclusive life, rarely speaking to neighbors, and when she was finally found, her nails were torn and bloodied, as if she'd spent her final moments clawing at the walls. After that revelation, Sarah refused to sleep another night in the house. They packed what they could into their car and drove away, never looking back. But here's the truly chilling part. Months later, Sarah's curiosity got the better of her. She searched online to see if the house had been sold again. And to her horror, the listing included brand new photos of the interior. The freshly painted guest room looked spotless, except for one small detail the realtor had clearly missed. On the wall just behind the bed, faint grooves were etched into the plaster. Long, desperate claw marks, as if the house itself refused to let go of its last tenant. Sarah shut her laptop, her hands trembling. Some homes aren't meant to be lived in. Some homes are prisons. If you think that was terrifying, just wait. Because our next story isn't about a house that clings to its past. It's about a home that actively hunted the new family inside it. What they went through will make you question whether walls can actually breathe, and whether something inside them might be alive. For Mark and his wife, Lena, buying their first home felt like a milestone. They had saved for years, scraping together every dollar to finally escape their cramped apartment and move into something bigger. A place with space for their kids to play, a backyard for summer barbecues, and maybe even a dog someday. The house they found seemed perfect, a cozy, single-family home tucked away on a quiet suburban street. The price was surprisingly affordable, but the realtor brushed it off, saying the owners were eager to sell quickly. Mark and Lena didn't ask too many questions. They signed the papers and moved in within a month. At first, everything seemed fine. The kids loved their new rooms. Lena enjoyed decorating, and Mark was proud to mow his very own lawn. But almost immediately, little things began to feel wrong. The air inside the house felt unusually heavy, as if the walls themselves were exhaling warm, damp breaths. At night, the family often woke up drenched in sweat, even though the thermostat read normal. Lena complained of headaches. The kids began having nightmares, and then came the sounds. It started with faint sighs, soft enough that Mark thought he was imagining them. But soon, those sighs grew louder, like long, drawn-out breaths echoing through the hallways. Sometimes they were slow and calm, other times sharp and ragged, as if the house itself were gasping for air. One night, Mark woke to find his youngest daughter standing in the doorway of his bedroom, her eyes wide, her little hands clutching her stuffed toy. "Daddy," she whispered, "the walls are breathing again." Mark sat up, his heart pounding. He carried her back to her room, but when he laid her down, he froze. The wallpaper on one side of her room seemed to bulge and contract, as if the plaster beneath it was expanding with each inhale and deflating with every exhale. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and it looked normal again. But the sound of breathing lingered, filling the silence like a presence too close to ignore. Over the next few weeks, the family grew more disturbed. Lena claimed she felt something moving underneath the floorboards when she walked. The kids began refusing to sleep alone. At dinner one evening, the oldest boy asked, "Why does the house sound like it's choking?" That question silenced everyone. Mark finally confided in a neighbor, hoping for some explanation. The man looked uneasy, glancing around as if afraid to be overheard. Then, in a low voice, he said the house had a history. Years ago, it belonged to a doctor who ran a private practice from his basement. Patients came and went, but many never left. No bodies were ever found, no charges ever filed, but rumors spread that the house itself had consumed them. Mark laughed it off at first, but that night, when he went to the basement to fetch some tools, he felt the temperature drop instantly. His breath fogged in front of him, and the air grew thick, almost liquid, as if he were standing inside a giant lung. The walls seemed to quiver, expanding and contracting in rhythm with some hidden heartbeat. He fled upstairs, slamming the basement door shut. The final straw came a week later. Lena woke up screaming, clutching her throat. She said she dreamed the house was trying to inhale her, pulling her into the walls. When Mark turned on the lights, he saw faint red marks across her neck, finger-shaped, but too wide and too long to belong to any human hand. The family moved out that very morning, leaving most of their belongings behind. The house was listed again within months, the price cut even lower. But here's the part that will make your skin crawl. Years later, another family moved in. And just like before, neighbors whispered that the walls began to breathe again. To this day, locals say you can walk past that house at night, press your ear against the siding, and hear it inhale deeply, as though it's waiting to swallow whoever dares to live there next. If you thought a house that breathes is horrifying, imagine moving into a home that doesn't just feel alive, it feels angry. In the next story, one family learned the hard way that sometimes the house chooses who it wants to keep, and it doesn't take no for an answer. When Maria and her teenage son, Alex, moved into their new rental home, they thought it was the start of a fresh chapter. Maria had just gone through a difficult divorce and wanted a safe, quiet place where she and Alex could rebuild their lives. The small, two-bedroom house wasn't perfect. It was older, with creaky floors and peeling paint, but it was affordable and close to Alex's school. From the very beginning, though, Alex hated the house. He complained about the smell, about how the air felt stale and sour, and about how he couldn't sleep in his bedroom. Maria chalked it up to teenage attitude, stress from the move, and the upheaval of the divorce. But deep down, she noticed it too. The way the house seemed to hum faintly at night, like a low vibration coming from inside the walls. Within the first week, Alex's behavior changed. He became withdrawn, snapping at Maria over little things. She'd find him sitting in his room for hours, staring at the same corner of the wall as if waiting for something. When she asked him about it, he would mutter, "It's watching me," before storming off. One night, Maria heard him talking softly in his room. At first, she thought he was on the phone, but when she pressed her ear to the door, her blood ran cold. He was whispering to the wall. She couldn't make out all the words, but she caught fragments. "Yes, I'll stay, I won't leave." Shaken, Maria barged in and demanded to know what he was doing. Alex looked startled, his eyes wide, but then he smiled, too calmly, too eerily. "It doesn't want you here, Mom, just me." Maria tried to dismiss it as sleep deprivation or stress. But over the following days, the house seemed to make its preference clearer. Maria's things would go missing, only to be found later shoved into the attic, as if the house itself were trying to erase her presence. The doors would jam when she tried to leave, trapping her inside while Alex moved freely through the halls. The final straw came when she woke in the middle of the night to find Alex standing over her bed, holding a hammer in his hand. His eyes were glazed, his voice flat. "It told me to keep you quiet." She screamed, jolting him out of his trance, and the hammer clattered to the floor. Alex burst into tears, saying he didn't know why he had done it, that he hadn't even been aware of walking into her room. The next morning, Maria packed their bags, but as they tried to leave, the front door refused to budge. It rattled and shook, as though something on the other side was forcing it closed. Desperate, Maria grabbed Alex's hand and dragged him toward the back door. To her shock, it opened easily, as if the house had only been barring her exit, not his. They ran to the car, not stopping until they were miles away. Maria never returned for her belongings. Later, she learned from a neighbor that the house had a grim history. A boy close to Alex's age had lived there decades earlier and had been found dead under mysterious circumstances, alone in his bedroom, his mother missing without a trace. Rumors spread that the house had claimed her, choosing to keep the boy for itself. Maria doesn't care what anyone believes. All she knows is this: the house didn't want her. It wanted her son. And if they had stayed any longer, she might not have lived to tell the story. But not every haunted house chooses its victim so directly. Sometimes, the terror isn't focused on one person, it spreads, touching everyone who steps inside. In our next story, a family's excitement over a fresh start was shattered when their home revealed itself to be a place of endless torment, where the nights never truly ended. For the Thompson family, the move was supposed to be a new beginning. After years of living in a crowded city apartment, they were thrilled to finally find an affordable house in the countryside. It was big enough for their 3 kids to have their own rooms, with a wide backyard and a view of the forest stretching out for miles. The realtor promised peace, quiet, and plenty of fresh air. On their first night, as the last box was unpacked, Mr. Thompson stepped outside and looked up at the sky. No city lights, no traffic noise, just stars and silence. It felt perfect. But what the family didn't know was that this silence wasn't peaceful. It was oppressive. The kind of silence that waits, listens, and watches. That night, as the children were falling asleep, Mrs. Thompson noticed something strange. The clocks had all stopped at exactly 3:12 a.m. She reset them, assuming a power glitch. But the next night, the same thing happened again, and the night after that. Soon, other disturbances followed. Doors that had been firmly locked were found wide open in the morning. Cold drafts swept through the hallways, even in the middle of summer. Most unsettling of all were the shadows. They weren't caused by lamps or sunlight. They appeared in corners where no light existed at all. Sometimes they shifted along the walls, stretching and curling like living smoke. The children were the first to be affected. Their youngest daughter, Emily, began waking up every night, screaming that the dark man was standing at her window. The middle child, Lucas, refused to sleep in his room entirely, insisting the shadows crawled across his walls when the lights went out. Even the oldest, a skeptical teenager, admitted he sometimes felt hands brushing against his face as he drifted off to sleep. The Thompsons tried to convince themselves it was stress from the move. But when Mr. Thompson began hearing footsteps packing the upstairs hallway every night, always stopping right outside his bedroom door, he could no longer ignore it. He even stayed up late with a baseball bat, waiting for the intruder, but when he yanked the door open, the hallway was empty. One night, Mrs. Thompson was jolted awake by a whisper. At first, she thought it was her husband talking in his sleep. But when she turned, she saw his lips weren't moving. The whisper was coming from the corner of the room. And then the nights grew longer, literally. No matter how many times they checked the time, morning never seemed to come when it should. Hours would pass in suffocating darkness, the clocks frozen again at 3:12. The family sat together in the living room one night, terrified as the windows stayed black for what felt like an eternity. When the sun finally rose, it was already noon, as if the world outside had skipped the morning entirely. The Thompsons reached out to a priest, begging for help. He blessed the house and told them to remain strong in their faith. But before he left, he confessed quietly to Mrs. Thompson that as soon as he entered, he had felt something pressing down on him, something that didn't want him there. The final night came a week later. The family awoke to the sound of every door in the house slamming at once. The shadows gathered in the hallway, thick and heavy, almost forming human shapes. And the whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping, chanting in a language no one could understand. Grabbing their children, the Thompsons ran out the front door, abandoning everything they owned. They drove through the night until the house disappeared from view. They never returned. Neighbors say the house still stands, empty and rotting. And those who dare to walk by claim the windows are always dark, no matter the time of day. Some swear that if you stop and listen, you'll hear the faint tick of clocks, stuck forever at 3:12. And as terrifying as that was, our final story might be the most disturbing of all. Because sometimes, a haunted house doesn't just want to scare you, it wants to keep you forever. The next family to move into their dream home discovered that once the house chose them, there was no escape. When Daniel and Rebecca purchased their new home, they couldn't believe their luck. It was far larger than anything they thought they could afford. A sprawling 3-story Victorian house with intricate woodwork, stained glass windows, and a huge garden in the back. The realtor explained the low price by saying the house had been on the market for years. "Most people don't like older homes," she shrugged. Daniel and Rebecca didn't care. To them, it was beautiful. It was theirs. For the first week, they were ecstatic. They filled the rooms with laughter, played music as they unpacked, and even joked about how the place looked like something out of a horror movie. But soon, the jokes didn't feel funny anymore. It started with the doors. Every time they tried to leave, even just for groceries, they would jam. The locks turned stiff, the frames seemed to swell, and no matter how hard Daniel yanked, the doors wouldn't budge. Yet strangely, delivery drivers had no trouble dropping packages on their porch. From the outside, everything worked fine. From the inside, the house refused to let them out. At first, Daniel thought it was his imagination, but Rebecca was the one who noticed the windows. No matter how hard she tried, none of them would open. Even the glass panes felt wrong, cold like metal and thicker than they should have been. It was as if the house was sealing them in. Then came the dreams. Both Daniel and Rebecca began waking at the same time each night, around 2:45 a.m., drenched in sweat, their hearts racing. They both dreamed of the same thing, standing at the front door, desperately trying to leave while the house whispered, "You belong to me now." The longer they stayed, the stranger things became. The food in their kitchen rotted within hours of being bought. Their phones lost all signal, no matter where they stood. Even the electricity flickered constantly, as though the house were alive and breathing through the wires. One night, Daniel decided to break a window with a chair. But as soon as he swung, the wood snapped in half, and the glass didn't even crack. He stared in disbelief, then swore he heard a low, rumbling laugh echo through the empty halls. Rebecca grew pale and exhausted, her health deteriorating rapidly. She swore she could hear voices murmuring in every room, calling her name, promising peace if she just gave in. Daniel tried to keep her strong, but he too was unraveling. They argued constantly, paranoia creeping in until neither trusted the other. Finally, in desperation, Daniel grabbed a hammer and began tearing at the drywall, determined to smash his way out. What he uncovered froze his blood. Behind the walls were not wooden beams, not insulation, but layers upon layers of bones. Human bones, skulls, ribs, femurs, all packed together, forming the very structure of the house. The house wasn't just keeping them in. It was built from the remains of those it had already claimed. That night, Rebecca vanished. Daniel tore through every room, screaming her name, but she was gone. The only trace left was her voice, faintly echoing through the vents, "I'm home now." When the house was finally investigated months later, after friends reported the couple missing, only one thing remained: Daniel's phone, lying on the floor near the front door, still recording. On it, a final message. "They won't let us go. The house, it keeps us. If you're hearing this, don't come here. Don't ever step inside, because once you do, you'll never leave." To this day, the house still stands untouched. Locals cross the street to avoid it, and no realtor dares to list it again. Some say, on quiet nights, you can hear voices whispering from the windows, begging for release. Others claim shadowy figures watch from the upstairs rooms, their hollow eyes following anyone who lingers too long. Passers-by often feel an icy chill, as if unseen hands brush against them. They say the house is patient, waiting for the next family to wander inside, another set of souls to trap forever within its cursed walls. Because some houses don't just haunt you, some houses own you, forever. And those were 5 terrifying true stories of dream homes turned into living nightmares. From scratching walls to houses that breathe, from shadows that stretch too long to doors that refuse to let you leave. These stories remind us that not every home is meant to be lived in. So tonight, as you turn off the lights and settle into your bed, ask yourself one question. Do you really know what history your house is hiding? And if the walls around you started whispering, would you be brave enough to listen? Sleep tight if you can. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true horror tales.